thank you for joining us and to give a fascinating the lecture on this fish and then dining politics of North Korea. And this is the very distinguished scholar, Professor Robert Whitton Lee Chesters, from UK. And we are going to have 15 minutes of lecture and then 15 to 20 minutes discussion between Professor Winston Lee Chesters and me. Okay, so the floor is yours, and we are looking forward to seeing to your lecture.
First of all, thank you very much for having me. So yes, I am Robert Winstanley Chesters from the University of Edinburgh, and the reason why I'm talking about this, this topic is essentially because it's the result of many years of work on fishing geography and fishing communities in North Korea. I'm a geographer by trade and by discipline, and my PhD is in human geography, which is why I am focusing on this. And I spent a lot of time working on North Korean fishing geographies and fishing communities a long way away from Pyongyang. And one thing that people always ask me about fishing in North Korea is, where do the fish go? Do North Koreans eat fish? And to a degree, yes, but primarily a lot of the product produced by the fishing communities of North Korea and the fishing infrastructure of North Korea is focused on elite dining in Pyongyang and servicing the sort of food needs of the sort of citizens of Pyongyang and the government and the elites of North Korea. So that's why I have ended up looking at this for this particular topic. So Andrei Lankoff, along with a number of others, the famous scholar from Keimyung University, I think, has previously written about eating in North Korea, and a few others have as well. Lankoff says Koreans love eating out, as every long-term resident of Seoul knows from his or her own experience. Going to a restaurant is one of the most common leisure activities in Korea. In this regard, the North is not that much different. So traditionally, Korean food output and restaurants known the sort of Ogurwang, and its earlier restaurant, the Ogurwang is the earlier one, and Chogurwang is the newer one. In contemporary North Korean politics and the sort of connections around the world, restaurants that North Korea is famous for, primarily outside of North Korea, for the connections that North Korea makes elsewhere through the Arirang chain, the Pyongyang Arirang chain, these North Korean restaurants that you find across Asia. I recommend in particular the branch in Kathmandu, in Nepal, which is a fine restaurant, where North Korea uses these restaurants to sort of extract value from the various countries and to support its embassies in those countries. It's also famous for the development of street food, which I'll talk a bit more later. But traditionally, the elite restaurants are the most important. And Ogurwang opened in 1960 on the Taedong River. A very large restaurant, sits up to 2,000. Built in a very traditional Korean style. It's supposed to be, it's regarded as a type of living museum by North Korea. So South Korea often talks about intangible cultural heritage. So this is a sort of intangible cultural heritage for North Korea, and is the custodian of Pyongyang cold noodle soup. So it's the most famous restaurant to sell cold noodle soup. It was very difficult historically to actually get a seat and a table at Ogurwang. You had to have a ticket, which you had to obtain through your work unit or through a political connection. And the tickets were only to gain entry, so they didn't pay for your food. So diners had to pay extra for food and drink. And obviously that was very expensive for North Korea. And so North Koreans only rarely had access to these restaurants, even the more recently Chongguang restaurant. But by 2009, at the end of Kim Jong-il's rule, these restaurants were not the only places where elites could eat in Pyongyang. There had been a series of not just the Pocheongmatcha style, not just the sort of these Pocheongmatcha street food dining style stalls. And I know in South Korea, Pocheongmatcha are very often in sort of tents on the street. But in North Korea, they tend to be in these sort of like food stalls that are built into the urban architecture. But also junk food, or what we might consider in the UK, Europe, or the United States, junk food style restaurants. So there was a Singaporean group who brought the franchise for a US a company called Waffle Town to North Korea, and they opened up the first KFC style fried chicken restaurant in North Korea, Samtaesong, 3 big stars. Now, 3 big stars is owned by the aunt of Kim Jong Un, Kim Kyung-wi, and it has over 30 different outlets across North Korea. And so also there's a variety of other things like pasta and pizza restaurants and burger restaurants. And these sort of serve a new elite of North Korea under the rule of Kim Jong-un, the elite that have been talked about as Donju, or masters of money. Those people who have been able to navigate the financial crises and challenges of the recent decades to accumulate a degree of wealth and saving through sort of extracting rents and fees, through trading in Jangwadang markets and trading and exchanging across the Chinese border, and reinvesting funds with the Chinese investors in apartment building complex. So Pyongyang's built so many apartments, it's now sometimes jokingly referred to as Pyonghattan. And so as much as these new North Korean elites desire burgers, tteokbokki, or pizza, they also occasionally want something more formal and luxurious. So joining the older style elite restaurants on the riverside of Pyongyang in recent years has been this brand new elite restaurant, the Taedonggang. And so opened in 2018 and very quickly blessed, as I say, by a visit from Kim Jong-un. The Taedonggang is the height of North Korean luxury dining. It's a collection of spaces essentially dedicated to the eating of fish. It has a Korean specialities restaurant, a sushi restaurant, and a restaurant dedicated to European fish dishes, all on the second floor. But primarily below, on the ground floor in this restaurant, is a large pool, a large fish pool filled with sturgeon, very large sturgeon. These are Chinese sturgeon. They're accompanied by a series of other pools containing different species of fish, crabs, terrapin, and other seafood. And it's sort of similar to other sort of elite restaurants around the world, particularly a restaurant chain called Zao, which came from Tokyo originally, has a branch now in New York City. Diners at the Taedonggang can catch their own fish in this ground floor pool with nets to take away or to have cooked on the premises. And so, it's a very charismatic space visited by Kim Jong-un, and important to Kim Jong-un, so much so that when Moon Jae-in visited Pyongyang in September 2018, Kim Jong-un picked this restaurant as the site of the dinner, the final dinner. So it's very expensive as a dining option, and way too expensive for the vast majority of North Koreans, but not beyond the means of wealthy citizens of Pyongyang looking for a treat, or beyond the means of party or army or government VIPs seeking to wine and dine their senior colleagues or commemorate a particularly important event. I should say also that there's a couple of photos in here which are from the fieldwork of a colleague of mine, Manon Prudhomme at the IHES University in Paris. Who's eaten there a few times, yeah. So Kim Jong-un obviously visited. Kim Jong-un took Moon Jae-in there. It's an important site for the elites of Pyongyang. But it's also interesting to me for the fact that the key dish at the Taedonggang is quite rare environmentally, which is the Chinese sturgeon. So one diner at the Taedonggang was remembered this when they were interviewed, that this was sturgeon they were eating. And Chinese sturgeon are critically endangered in the wild because of the various hydroelectric developments on the Yangtze River, which restricts their migration. So it's bizarre that North Korea should use this particular species to serve the Taedonggang River. But when it becomes specifically, because it's very hard to get them, so they need to breed them and breed them through aquaculture projects. And they're also difficult to breed. So figure out technologically and sort of in animal husbandry ways the ways to best breed them to generate enough population so that you can actually eat fish, use them as fish in a restaurant. But North Korea has been trying to do this since 2010. In fact, Kim Jong-il made a visit before he died in 2010 to the main breeding site at the Rongjong fish breeding farm, where he celebrated the success of the facility in breeding sturgeon in saltier water than they would normally live in, because these are not saltwater sturgeon. These are freshwater sturgeon. And the Taedonggang has continued to receive the fish directly from fishery research stations and the aquaculture facilities of these research stations around North Korea. So Taedonggang receives its Atlantic salmon because it doesn't just serve sturgeon; it also serves Atlantic salmon. And it gets these Atlantic salmon from the Raksan offshore salmon farm. And so, and there are a number of other salmon farms. Taedonggang is therefore considered very much part of the environmental and scientific development of North Korea. However, intriguingly, for a high-end restaurant, diners have also recounted another unusual aspect of eating at the restaurant, other than the fact that they're eating sturgeon. And that's the fact that the food tastes like chlorine, because the fish stay in a little pool for months and the fish tastes like chlorine, according to one interviewer. And this perhaps reminds the reader not just of the ecological impact of eating the fish for this restaurant directed at North Korea's elite, but the fact that in spite of the various developmental efforts and real developmental efforts over several decades involved in the breeding and production of fish and sturgeon like this, it reminds us of the logistical issues involved in food supply, including the preparation and the conservation of those fish once caught, and the sort of hygiene standards in the preparation facilities and distribution in North Korea. But it's fascinating to see that even in a venue meant for the elite and meant for the consumption of highly valuable and ecologically sensitive food, this is still the case, despite the ambitions of North Korea, of Kim Jong-un and Kim Jong-il. I want to say one more aspect in these 15 minutes about the sort of developmental ambitions of North Korea at the sea, or related to the sea. And that is the developments at Wonsan Kalma. So this is essentially a story prior to COVID-19. The investment stopped because COVID-19 essentially closed North Korea since 2020. But prior to COVID-19, a huge amount of investment was to support the infrastructure and the transformation of the Wonsan Kalma coast into a leisure destination for foreigners, essentially. So Wonsan was always important to North Korea, going back to 2006, famous for its Songdo-won beach and the Children's Union camp that was there, which brought children from across the communist world to North Korea. But in 2014, a special tourist zone was announced. And in 2016, the Wonsan Kalma tourist area was announced. And Kim Jong-un began to make a number of on-the-spot visits. Wonsan Kalma Airport had been redeveloped into a sort of international airport. And the Wonsan Kalma beach, which was famous from photos like this taken by the Singaporean Aman Pa, ended up being redeveloped into this tourist site. So Kim Jong-un and a number of other premiers of North Korea and many other political figures visited this site and the developments between in 2017 and 2018, 2019, developing the site very rapidly, including a really wide variety of hotel accommodation and leisure options, including high-end hotels, but also things like family-sized villas and other sort of like cheaper apartments in the facilities, which Kim Jong-un was very interested. And while some speculated that Wonsan and its airport redevelopment focused on enabling South Korean tourists at the time to more easily reach Mount Kumgang, others suggested that actually it's Chinese tourists that North Korea was seeking with this development. So, Wonsan Kalma, we should perhaps consider before COVID to be North Korea's aspiration to create a mass market package holiday or budget tourist destination. And that Kim Jong-un was envisaging a sort of cheaper option for newly mobile Chinese citizens for whom getting into North Korea is much easier and cheaper than for Japanese or tourists from other nations.
Okay, so I have some questions, and then you actually the start with your the lecture with the where do fishes go? It's your basic argument is just to elites. Elites means probably say handful of probably 20,000 to 100,000 political elites in Pyongyang, and then not to ordinary citizens. And then those extraordinary and then sometimes look very foreign. What are the primary information source for the food? They must know about this burgers and all kind of you say junk food. At the same time, this caviar and then other very extraordinary say foreign fishes too. So where do they get those information?
I mean, so North Korean elites historically, before the 1980s and 90s, did not travel abroad that often. But in recent decades, they could hope to go abroad once in their life to China or to Vietnam. But in recent decades, North Korean political elites and sort of people in the Donju, the sort of money earning classes, have become much more mobile, apart from the COVID period. So people would travel a lot into China and other places in Asia, to Vietnam, to Myanmar, to other places. And in those journeys would become familiar with like luxury eating styles in other countries. And I think anybody who's ever been to China knows that one thing that Chinese people like to do is host. And when they take you to a restaurant, it's often the most luxurious restaurant they can afford. And they order all sorts of things which are very expensive. So like, as an act of hosting. So North Koreans themselves would have been involved in this, and they would have visited restaurants. Chinese fish-focused restaurants are always fascinating for the fact that you have to walk in through an enormous wall of aquariums with all of the different sort of fish, And so also I'm sure Jeonju, sort of younger North Korean elites would have become familiar with luxury dining and food styles of the rest of the world through the sort of media information they receive from South Korea in various ways on the sort of USB sticks smuggled in, that sort of stuff. And so North Korean elites and younger North Koreans are aware of these luxury foods. And, a certain level of luxury dining has always been present in Pyongyang for the very high elite, even in the 60s and 70s, because Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il were always very interested in food, interested in like fine dining. Kim Jong-il apparently loved pizza so much that he flew a team of chefs from Naples to open up the first pizza restaurant and to train a group of army officers into how to cook pizza. Yeah. And so if you go to Pyongyang and you go to the earliest Italian restaurant, it's actually very good.
Thank you for your excellent lecture, and then the fascinating conversation on the fish business and fish restaurant business in Pyongyang in North Korea. And it was very informative, and then it was very fun. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it. Thanks to Sohee, thanks to you, and thanks to Yonsei for having me, and the Ministry of Unification.
Thank you so much. Okay, this is the end.